Everyone. I hope everybody's having a great day so far. We have a slight change of plans this morning. Tanya Mabry, our Southwest NAHRO president, was going to be interviewing or having this discussion with Miss Adrianne Todman, our national CEO. However, due to the hurricane, Tanya is kind of tied up with some other things, so I'm going to fill in. You all know me by now. Michael keeps putting me on the spot. I'm Sheila, the Kansas NAHRO president. Before we get started, I want to thank our business partners and exhibitors, Better NOI, MRI Software, Precision Concrete Cutting, Thermal Flow Technologies, and the Ultimate IT guys. Hope you have visited them in the virtual exhibit hall and gotten your points for chatting with them in our event game. So this morning I'm going to introduce Adrianne Todman, and forgive me for reading, but they gave me like a whole page of stuff about her, and I'm not going to share all of that. Adrianne is the CEO of NAHRO. She is in DC, where she works tirelessly to protect us and lobby for us and get our word out. She visited the Kansas NAHRO conference in 2018 when we were actually in person in Salina, the first NAHRO CEO to ever do that. We appreciate that, and we had such a wonderful time when she was there. Adrianne does have a background in housing. She was the executive director of the Washington, D.C. Housing Authority. Is that correct, Adrianne? Yes. So she knows our pain, and she feels it right along with us as she's there in DC, keeping everything on track. If there's anything I missed, I'm sure it will come up in our conversation. So welcome, Adrianne. Thank you for joining us in Kansas this morning.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled. I really wish I could be out there.
I really wish you could too. I really wish we could all be together, but this too shall pass, we hope.
Yes, it will. Absolutely.
First question this morning on our Wake Up with Kansas NAHRO show is, what was your leadership journey to become the CEO of NAHRO? How did this come about for you?
Wow. So I'll say probably like many of us who got into this field, it was an accident. I don't recall graduating from high school and saying, you know what, my number one goal in life is to go out and run some public housing. And it's not something that felt to occur naturally. But I'm tremendously blessed to be here. And I went to a small liberal arts school in Western Massachusetts. And I was born and raised in St. Thomas, which I encourage all y'all who've never been to the Caribbean. It's a great place to visit when we can visit places again, really. And went to school in Western Mass and graduated from there and beelined to Washington, D.C. I was a government major, and I knew that this is where I wanted to be. And I've been here now for about 30 years. And here in D.C., I think I did it the opposite way. You're supposed to start local and go national. And I started to work in Congress right out of college, and that was interesting. And so I learned a lot of how the sausage gets made, as we say here in the Beltway. And I was there for about 4 or 5 years, and left the Hill and went and worked for HUD. And that was really interesting. And I had the great pleasure of working at a HUD that had what I consider to be one of the best secretaries of all time, Henry Cisneros, who was filled with energy and ideas and cared about not just public housing and the voucher program, like literally cared about housing agencies. And sometimes there's a disconnect. Sometimes we have leaders who care about the programs, but don't care so much about the people that administer the programs. And in that secretary, he cared for both. And left HUD and began to work at the DC Housing Authority, and was there for 14 years and ran it for 9 of those 14. And it was an amazing time. I always say, and I know Sheila, you probably heard me say this, that it will probably be the best job I ever had. And I love being the CEO of NAHRO. Love it. I love working on behalf of all of you. But there is something about the work. That's something about that work that's despite its frustration, is intoxicating. And I'm happy to be your CEO now.
I think that intoxication is why all of us do this job. Last week, a couple of weeks ago, when Tina was getting ready to leave Salina, she called me and to tell me her news and said, aren't you interested in coming back to Salina? And I thought about it for a day, but thought, as the director of a larger housing authority like Salina, I would miss the constant contact with my residents, being able to do some of the other stuff that comes along with being director of a housing authority. And you're right, it does get in your soul and you can't get rid of it.
That's right. It sure does. And I feel blessed to be able to be in that. So I now live vicariously through folks like you, Sheila. That's what I do, through all the members.
Thanks. So tell us, what is leadership? What does that mean to you? Leading NAHRO, leading a housing authority?
Right. So being a leader to me is really being a servant. You know, so the goal of a leader is to generally set the vision on what we think is right and where's the path we need to go. And then having the right people around you, and you just free them to do what they need to do to get you there. And then you serve them, right? You say, what do you need? How can I be supportive? Not just on the work they do, but also them as the totality, as being human beings. You know, we bring who we are to work each and every day. We might try to hide it, but eventually it comes out. We bring who we are to work. And so I believe that a leader is really a servant in terms of helping other people become their better selves and getting a vision that is important for not just an organization like NAHRO, but for each one of the members who look to us to get their work done. So it's, and sometimes it's hard to get to that point. I know when early on in my career, you know, the idea of being a leader was basically telling everybody what to do. And so that is the perspective of a leader, certainly when you're in your 20s or early 30s. But as you move along, you realize it's a little bit more of an evolved thought, you know, and being a leader is really being a servant, I would say.
I would agree. Good. That's a good way to think of it, especially in the industry that we are in. We are in the business of serving people. Without our tenants, without our residents, without our other directors, without NAHRO, we wouldn't have jobs. We wouldn't have anything. There wouldn't be a place for us. So serving and being a servant is good.
You know, one of the things I saw in the description for this session, Sheila, was, you know, I think it was the hopes and dreams that I have for NAHRO, somewhere in the description. I don't know if it's in one of the questions. And I said, you know, it's interesting that it's not necessarily the hopes and dreams for NAHRO for me. It's really the hopes and dreams for everybody who is listening and watching us right now. And the idea of NAHRO, the concept of NAHRO, what we want it to be and what it should be and what it will always be, is a one-stop place when you enter the industry. So I see the 21-year-old coming out of college being really interested in a place like NAHRO. Maybe their first stop is the jobs ad, right? Like, I'm looking for a job. I want to understand housing. They get a job, and then along that journey, along that arc, that we are always there to help them develop professionally, but also to help advocate for the things that we need. And so the dream is really making sure that any one of you who stay in this industry, and I think we all do. I've really found somebody who left housing and said, I'm going to go and become a teacher, and I'm going to go run a hospital. It doesn't quite happen. We kind of stay. And the idea is that we're on that journey with you. And so that's really the dream, the dream of NAHRO. And so Sheila, you know, you're a leader in your own right. Talk a little bit about how you got to be a high-powered executive director.
Oh, that's an interesting story. I had worked at the Salina Housing Authority, started my job in housing in 1990. So almost 30 years ago, I've been doing this. Applied when our director at that time was resigning, retiring. I had applied to fill that position, didn't get the job. And so went to work for a private management company managing some Section 8202 elderly. From there, went into managed some private tax credit properties, went back to Salina to the Housing Authority. I'm not mentioning any names because some people do remember that history, but the director that was there at that time, my second tenure was less than wonderful, and she fired me. And after that, not too long after that, there was a huge investigation and she was fired. And so I was at that point doing tax credit management and met my husband to be out here in Goodland. And just so happened the director out here was getting ready to, she was hiring an assistant so to be trained to take her position. And her plan was to hire someone that could work for a couple years, learn the job, get their feet under them. And so she hired me as her assistant. And a year later, sadly, she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer and never came back to work. And my feet were in the fire and my behind was in the chair, and we've moved on from there. That has been, I've been out here for 8 years, the director for 7.
Right.
So
that's, you know, it's so interesting when I've done similar online conferences like this now for Pacific Northwest and Connecticut and a couple points south. And it's so interesting when people tell their story about how they landed where they are, that it always began with the serendipity of the moment. You know, that this happened and that happened and this happened. And like it was almost a faith. And I think that's what in many ways keeps us connected. I think and it's little things too. It's not even like the work that we do is critical, but you were mentioning to me, Sheila, that, you know, you're even beginning to see potentially some of the smoke. It's a glaze over the smoke from the wildfires. And just when you think about how connected we are, not just in work, but in the experience that we're having across this country with disasters. I know that, you know, we're really concerned about what's happening in Iowa. We're really concerned about the wildfires out west. We're really concerned. I mean, Tanya couldn't join us because of Hurricane Sally. You know, that we are most powerful. We are most powerful when, in settings like this, state by state and by region, we begin to recognize all of our commonalities and the things that we all need to keep going, not just as housers, which is critical, but also as just people, right? Like people, like how, if we want to get rid of the smoke that's above you right now, what do we do to support the folks in California? You know, we've got this hurricane storms headed toward us in mid-Atlantic. We are more connected than we give ourselves permission to think about sometimes. And part of, I see, the job of NAHRO is reminding that as a national organization, to remind us all and you all that you're not alone.
Exactly.
You know, you're not an island unto yourself, and then there's a whole country that's here to support you.
So leading into that, the next question on my list, what's it been like being the CEO of NAHRO with all of this pandemic affecting our entire country? And you and I talked before everybody joined us, it's a lot different for us here in Kansas than it is for you in DC. It's a lot different for me in Goodland, Kansas than it is for those in Salina or Topeka, or Kansas City or Wichita. So how has it been being in charge of all of this and this mess?
Well, you know, we back in mid-March, we all went virtual as well as a staff here in DC, and we had to do what many of you, maybe not all of you, had to do, and get laptops to folks and make sure that we could work virtually, and, you know, how to get documents signed and checks signed and whatnot. So we did we did a fair amount of that, but then we had to stand back and say, whoa, what's happening across the country? And I will say that in addition to just being very vigilant in telling folks at HUD and folks on the Hill what was happening on the ground, particularly at HUD. I mean, I love my colleagues at HUD. I used to work there some time ago, but I thought they took way too much time getting some of the money out to y'all that needed it. And I said that to Hunter. This isn't a big secret, and too much time letting us know what the reporting requirements are, right? There was just a webinar just this week after 3 or 4 months of funding. So there was just too much time taken. And so we had to keep pushing on those fronts. Things like, some of you may not have to use it, but virtual inspections is something that NAHRO said some of our members need to be able to not have their staff go into a unit, and God knows residents don't want people inside their unit. And so we're the ones that pushed for virtual inspection. So we've been in that space, but now where we are is even more curious. So now it's a big tent. So we have housing authorities of all sizes, from NYCHA to Salina, as part of our membership. We have housing authorities that are in very different geographic areas, urban, suburban, rural, very rural. But now we have this next layer, like people like yourself are saying, we have, I'm doing air quotes, life is normal. People are walking around, they're going into stores, they're going into restaurants, there are no mask requirements, et cetera, to the extreme where some folks are still working from home. And they're still like in a phase 2 situation. So we're now having to balance this another layer of diversity of our members' experience on the ground. And being here in DC, where it's still, particularly inside the city, it's pretty much still on lockdown. There is a mask requirement, and stores are not open the way that they used to be. I keep reminding my wonderful staff, not everybody's like the way we are in DMV. So we have to be careful when we talk about this concept of reopening and this concept of, going back to work, that some folks never left the office.
Exactly.
Some folks, so we are having to reframe some of the way that we look at the issues moving forward that way too. But the one thing that's consistent, I will say, is we are preparing for post-pandemic, right? It's not just about this moment. NAHRO needs to lead and say, let's look beyond that. So we are working and saying, with all the 43 million renters who are out there, some of them are y'all's, but not all of them. There are a lot of desperate people right now, and not necessarily where you are, but there are a lot of desperate people, and those desperate people are knocking on the doors of housing authorities, and I can't pay my rent. I don't have a job. I don't even know when I'm going to get a job. And we're getting ready for that. We need to have more vouchers, right? We need to make sure our public housing gets the funding they need. We need to have more money to build housing. And so that's where our antenna is right now, fighting for emergency rental assistance for the right now, but definitely looking ahead to see where we have to go.
Very good. I do not envy that position for you, simply because I know even where I am, where we are somewhat isolated, and it's not bad here as it has been in other places, but we still don't have any clue what it's going to look like in the future. I saw a funny meme that said, okay, it's Halloween and a full moon and something else on October 31st. Maybe it'll be like a factory reset button and everything will go back to normal. And we all know that's not ever going to happen, but the unknowns, I know for a lot of us, are really difficult in this. And working with HUD for as many years as some of us had, we know that the unknown is always out there. They're going to come up with something tomorrow that none of us expected or was even on the radar. So we know that. But this encompasses everything of our lives and our tenants' lives. And so, yeah, I don't envy that part of your position right now.
Well, I think, and so here's the weird part about this, right, is that we are probably resilient to a fault, those of us who do this work, right? When we don't have enough money, we figure it out. And we complain, but we figure it out because we know we're doing the Lord's work. We know we're doing work that's critical to people's lives. So we are, and I sometimes say to a fault. And that resiliency is just ever more stronger in the space that we're in now. We all had to pivot, most of us had to pivot and create this other space. So I know you all have it. I mean, a part of what makes this job easier is I know you all are going to do everything you can do to the best of your ability to keep things going. And my job is, notwithstanding that resiliency, to make the case for you to say, you know, our folks aren't going to complain. They're going to get their job done. But let's be clear, the circumstances under which they're doing it and all the things they can't get to because they have to just figure out how to put Band-Aids onto wounds. So definitely don't envy me, but know that I am blessed to have an army of folks, Sheila, like you and others doing this work, that when I say you all have got it, I feel very confident. You know, some folks are like, well, you know, there's these other folks, they're not too good at what they do. But, you know, when we say we're going to spend money, we're going to get it done, here's the work that's going to get done, I know that all of y'all will get it done.
I want to just take a second here and compliment your staff. Tess, Georgie, Eric, Tushar. I'm on the National Legislative Committee and the Small Agency, excuse me, the Small Agency Committee. And through all of this, they have been amazing at keeping us all up to date on what was going on in Washington so that that information could be passed on, or we were able to invite other people that aren't necessarily involved in National NAHRO, but just other small agencies that wanted to hear what was going on in Washington, because for a time there, it felt like there was such a disconnect because everybody was at home and everybody was trying to figure out how do we stay in touch with each other. So I want to compliment those folks at the office in DC, because they were amazing at keeping us on top of what was going on.
Thank you for that. And they truly have been amazing. And we've had to figure out how to retool how we communicate with you all since we didn't have our conferences. I mean, we're headed toward our now third online conference, November 17th and 18th. Folks can find the details on the website.
Adrianne, I think you froze up. There you are.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, great. Okay,
Yep.
I was just saying that our third online conference, November 17th and 18th.
Right.
You know, and here's the one thing about our online conferences that I found to add new value is that there are many smaller agencies that don't have the time, bandwidth, or money to travel all the way to DC or all the way to Orlando. And now folks can, you know, with a couple clicks of a computer, join us at our conference. And so while we don't envy the situation we're in right now, I'm really happy that some of you who ordinarily wouldn't be able to see us have an opportunity to engage with us.
We talked about that yesterday in the future of our organization with NAHRO, that for some of the smaller agencies to get people more involved, Sunny and I were discussing the possibility of more hybrid, even once things go back to the new normal, some kind of a hybrid conference. So some of our smaller agencies across the country, not just here in Kansas, but across the country, can also be involved and feel like they are connected to everyone else, get their voice heard. I had a small housing authority director tell me one time she didn't go to conference because she felt like nobody listened to her. And so, and she didn't have the money. She was 20 units part-time. You know, how do you leave for a week and travel all the way across the country? So if we can incorporate something into some sort of a hybrid where some of the part of the conference is virtual, then I feel like we can maybe get a lot more people involved.
Right. And that's, you know, you out of every challenge, you know, you look to, you know, what are the opportunities? And that's certainly one that we will continue to explore. And, you know, it's funny you should mention that about the one lady. The one thing, having run a large agency, and I think I said this with you, Sheila, and I know I said it to Tina. One of the things about running a large agency is that it taught me how much I didn't know, even though I was the executive director. So when I began to engage with folks like you back in 2018, just to learn, one of the reasons I came to Kansas is like, I know what Seattle and DC and San Francisco and New York and Miami, but I don't know what's happening in parts of Kansas. So that's why it was critical to me to go out to Kansas and Utah and all the other places where I'd not been before. But here's what I learned, that you all are unicorns. You're amazing. I mean, I don't know how to calculate rent. I mean, I've not done an HQS inspection. I wouldn't know what to look at to save my life, And so I learned the multitude of things that smaller agencies have to know, in addition to leading, right? We talked about leadership, but you also have to be the technocrat. And I admire you all deeply for that. And you're right. If you're a 1 or 2 person shop, you can't stop, right? You can't stop. And I have learned that. And now whenever I'm in a room where folks are talking about these issues, all of you who can't stop are in that room with me now.
Hattie just gave me the 3-minute warning, and honestly, that was the best way to wrap it up. Thank you so much for realizing that. Again, like when Tina asked me to come, if I wanted to come to Salina, I don't want to be the director of a big agency. I want to have my tenant sit in front of me at the desk and tell me what new recipe she tried last night, or how her grandkids are, and along with all the rest of it. I'm
Sure.
one of the anomalies in that I don't hate the paperwork. So thank you for realizing that there are some of us out there.
It sounds like we're going to have some folks send their paperwork to you.
Probably.
Absolutely.
Adrianne,
Well, it sounds like you all have you guys have a great agenda today. I was looking at, you got the IT guys. What a great name. We gotta, that's a cool name, and your diversity section. So I'm just wishing all of you have a great conference. You're a great leader in Sheila. I feel like whenever we see each other, we're BFFs, and we're chit-chatting, and really thrilled with what you all are doing in Kansas, and God bless. Have a great conference.
Thank you so much, Adrianne, for joining us. Good luck in DC. Stay safe.
Absolutely. Will do.